Hi everyone, and welcome back to Cars and Relevant Specs. This time I wanted to tell you about some what I will call horror stories, if you want to call them that, about each of the different vehicles that I have owned, specifically the sellers or dealers of those vehicles. Now, just kind of skipping forward for a moment, for my present vehicle, the 2024 Ford Maverick XL with the 2-liter turbo, I am very pleased with that vehicle, and after owning it for getting close to 2 years now, May will be 2 years, I am very grateful to have it, and I am definitely confident that I made the right decision in purchasing the Ford Maverick. With that particular trim and the tow package and the tonneau cover and so forth. You can check out my previous videos and you'll see more about that if you want. But I wanted to start with my very first vehicle and go over some things to be aware of when you are purchasing a vehicle and also when you're getting it serviced. Just some things to watch out for and some examples from my experiences. Even though your experiences will obviously be different, maybe this will help to prevent some frustration or extra expenses and so forth in your future experiences. But if you are wanting to skip forward to the Ford Maverick information to get the most recent info, well, just feel free to check out the links below for those timestamps. All right, yes, it's broken up into chapters. Okay, but for those who might be more curious, I recommend watching this whole video. All right, so I will start back in the beginning of my car stories. That goes back to 1999. A long time ago for maybe some younger people, but for many of you, that's just recent history. But that's when I got my first car. Obviously a used car, 1986 Subaru GL, and I purchased it from a mechanic shop. Now, I actually personally knew one of the main mechanics there, and I had asked him if he would recommend that vehicle to me if I were his son, to kind of get that, that family recommendation. And my whole family knew him well. In fact, that was a recommendation from my family to ask him some more questions like that. So in any case, I was able to talk with him, and I knew very little about cars at that time. But he did let me know of some issues with it. It did need to have the muffler replaced, but he didn't really tell me a lot about it. Now, it was a very inexpensive car. I was just working part-time. I was still a teenager, and I needed a vehicle so I wasn't having to walk or ride to work or catch the bus or whatever. And I thought, you know what, it's time for me to get a vehicle. I have my license. Let's go for this. And other vehicles were just too far out of my price range. I didn't want to save up forever, and I wasn't prepared to get a loan at that time and so forth, as far as, like a loan from a financial institution, for example. So this is where the dealer horror story comes in. So they had told me, okay, if you pay X amount more, we'll go ahead and put on a new muffler because it needs a muffler, so I opted for that. What they didn't tell me is that the whole exhaust pipe was getting really old, and after owning the vehicle for roughly 4 years, the exhaust pipe rotted out so bad that the muffler basically fell off. Thankfully not on the road, but it completely separated from the exhaust pipe, like maybe 2 feet up the exhaust pipe from where it connected to that muffler. And because there were holes that had rotted through in the muffler, and because of normal wear and tear, and I don't think it was a very good muffler on top of that, the muffler started rotting out inside as well, and it was just a mess. But in any case, the vehicle had some water leaks that developed fairly early on in the trunk. I used to have to get like a quart yogurt container and basically bail out the water from it. Also, the timing belt broke after driving it not many thousands of miles, probably just several thousand miles. The timing belt broke. One of the two timing belts, because it's a Subaru with the boxer engine, you know. It was a front-wheel drive, non-turbo, but fuel-injected, single-point fuel injection Subaru GL. Anyhow, it also started rusting out around the left rear fender, and it needed a front brake job, and I think they had done the rear brakes, if I'm not mistaken. They were planning to do that anyhow, but they didn't do the front brakes, and so thankfully I had a mechanic friend who helped me do the front brakes. Something like that. Whatever the case was, there is a lot of work that needed to be done, and they didn't really tell me much about that, and I had hoped that I could trust them because I knew one of the mechanics and all of that. So I'm very thankful that I had that vehicle, though, because since it was in so such meager condition, it gave me lots of opportunities to learn on it. And so I learned how to replace timing belts. I learned how to do a front brake job. I learned how to do a little bit of body work, at least the paint work, and with some primer. And I experimented, but I didn't really do that well. But guess what? It was a learning experience. And I learned how to do lots of regular maintenance, tire rotation and fluid changes and so forth. But that's another topic for another day. However, I do want to mention how even if you know somebody on the inside of a place where you were buying a used vehicle, make sure that you get some kind of second opinion, unless it's somebody who you know very, very well and you fully trust, and they have earned that trust. Now, that particular gentleman, he was a nice guy and all of that in a lot of ways, but I guess he figured, you know what? Jared needs a car, he needs something cheap, and for something cheap, what can you expect? And I did not really know much about all that, and so I only had a certain amount of money at that time and borrowed a little bit from some relatives to kind of make up the difference, and that was that. So that was the first story. 1986 Subaru GL, purchased at 13 years of age for the vehicle when I was a teenager myself, but older than that, of course. Okay, so time for the next one. It was a 2005 Kia Rio. I had a co-signer on that one, and it was a new car. It was nice to go to a new car, first new car after having the one used car, so that was a real blessing. I know not everyone has been able to experience that, so I'm thankful that I was able to. There were a lot of great things about that car. 2005 Kia Rio, very simple, but with that, the only real big issue that I had during the years that I owned it was, well, twofold. One was at the dealership, which I feel like is the quote-unquote horror story of this video. The other one was just, hey, you know what? It needed to make good on the warranty. The transaxle went out after just a couple years or so of driving, and it had hard shifted on a cold morning when I needed to jump out and merge with traffic on a busy road, and that caused catastrophic failure in the transaxle. But that was understandable. Kia was still basically honing their skills with making high quality vehicles, and nowadays I feel like they're way better. But they took care of it. I didn't have to pay a penny out of my own pocket from what I recall, so that was great. So that was actually a good positive story, even though I wish that I didn't have to go through with that. But at the same time, I feel like all in all it was a positive experience. But the not so positive experience was when I went to the Kia dealership. I let them know how I wanted to be the owner on the vehicle. I wanted to sign for it. They said, well, you're going to need a co-signer, because at that time I had a relatively new job and wasn't working a lot of hours and making a lot of money at that point. I was promoted shortly thereafter to a full-time position, but understandably they needed a co-signer. Well, my best friend, he co-signed with me, but the dealership did not tell us, oh, by the way, when you do this, it's going to be in your friend's name as the primary and you'll just be a secondary on that. No, this was my car. This wasn't for my friend's car. He was nice enough to co-sign for me. That was a wonderful blessing. But the dealership didn't tell us until we were signing the final paperwork. And I'm like, wait a second. No, this lists his name as the owner first. What is this? And they said, well, that's what we've got to do to get you this loan. And I'm like, no, we're not doing this. And so they said, all right, well, if you go to your credit union, whatever, then you can do this. Well, sure enough, I went to my credit union. They did it right. And we went back to the dealership. And it was under my name as the owner of the vehicle. And then my friend as the co-signer. So thankfully, we read what was in the contract. And I didn't just sign it away. And now guess what? I've just made sure that my friend has my vehicle and I'm the secondary. No, that's not what I wanted. Maybe it wouldn't have made that much difference in the end, but I wanted it to be, for me, my first new car purchase. Yes, with a co-signer, but yeah, that was interesting. So read those contracts. Doesn't mean you have to read every tiny little word unless you want to. I still recommend doing that, but make sure you know the main details at the minimum. And if possible, look over the entire thing, top to bottom, every little word, fine print, and everything. And if you don't understand something, ask. And if you don't get a straightforward answer, at the very least, check with somebody else who would know. But if you're getting weird runaround answers, then it's time to turn your back and go somewhere else. In my case, thankfully, my credit union took care of the loan side of things, went back to the dealer, and we were able to square things away from there. Okay. Then that brought me to the first new car that I bought without a co-signer, and that was the 2007 Dodge Charger SRT8. And that one, it was an interesting story. Lots of interesting situations there. Now, a mistake that I made is I purchased it in a bit of a rush. I wanted to purchase one that was local. The local dealer did not have one available, so I went to one out of town. Incidentally, the local dealer contacted me right after I purchased the one out of town and said, well, we've got one in. Do you want to come take a look at it? And I'm like, oh, sorry, too late. I already got one. It was a different color. The local dealer got in the color that I had originally wanted, but the out-of-town one was the only other one that I could find that had that SRT8. So I'm like, hey, you know what? This is what I want to do, and I got it. So anyhow, I went there and purchased it. My dad and I went there, and we purchased it. I purchased it with my dad there kind of as moral support. And I was the only signer on that one, so it was an exciting time. I had got a pre-approval from that same credit union after paying off the previous loan, which was a real blessing. And so with that, I had to go to work later that afternoon from what I recall. Now that was multiple years ago. Over 18 years ago. It was November of 2007. So this November would be 19 years ago. But in any case, I had a limited amount of time. I did some wheeling and dealing with the salesman. It had been the 2007 model, and 2007 was coming to a close, and the 2008 models were coming out and all of that. So this had been sitting on the lot, and because it was a 425 horsepower muscle car, it looked as if people had, as I found out later, most likely taken it out on joyrides and so forth for test drives. So I'd also heard of a similar story from another dealer, someone who used to work at a dealership, who talked about the salesman taking sports cars on joyrides, and I thought, boy, you know what, that kind of explains a lot, but that's kind of another story as well. Anyway, so in this particular case, there were a few little hang-ups with purchasing the vehicle, like the battery had been just left to die, and so they had to replace the battery there. That was kind of an interesting sign. In hindsight, I can see so many at least yellow flags in this process. But anyhow, I ended up purchasing it. I did get the dealer to come down by several $1,000s from what they were asking, and so it was actually a pretty decent price for it. But for a new vehicle, you expect it to be new, to look new, and so forth. Well, after I had purchased it, I managed to get home, I think grab a quick bite to eat, and grab my lunch stuff and whatever, and head to work. Well, once I had a chance to start looking it over more, I gave the car its first wash and so forth, I started noticing some things. I had been very careful with it. I hadn't parked right up next to a curb where I could curb the wheels. I hadn't gone, joyriding or anything weird like that, like over some big bumpy roads or something bonkers. But I started noticing things. A little bit I had noticed right at the beginning, like on the interior, but that's about it. But I started looking more closely once I had more time, and obviously I shouldn't have purchased it in a rush if I wanted something that was pristine. But that had a physical key. These days I know that's pretty rare, especially for a vehicle that had a lot of extras like that did. But around the physical keyhole, there were a lot of scratches, like somebody wasn't watching where they were putting the key and they just sort of put it in there until it finally found the hole. So it was scratched up around there, and I don't know how many times the key had been put in that thing. There were also blemishes and imperfections around the fascia trim pieces inside the vehicle, around the gauge cluster. It was either manufactured incorrectly, there was a defect, or somebody had scraped off some of the paint around that. There was like this, almost like this dent, almost like if somebody tried to remove the fascia around the center console, like media cluster or media screen. It almost looked like someone had stuck a screwdriver in there and tried to pry it, because it looked like it was sort of bent, and you could see sort of a little tiny hole there, like almost if a screwdriver had been in there. I don't know if that was just careless manufacturing or if somebody really had tried to remove that because something was going on and it needed to be reset. I don't know. But I had noticed, though, that the driver's side rim had this big old, basically, curb chewed out mark into it. Hadn't noticed that before. It was right along near where the rubber overlapped with the rim, and unless I had looked all around each rim ahead of time, I might not have caught it. It wasn't as bad as it could have been, perhaps, but it was like a polished, shiny aluminum rim, so the whole thing kind of looked shiny, so it wasn't like a black painted rim where if it's curved a little bit, you can really see the contrast. It all looked, metallic, so it didn't stand out to me as quickly, and I hadn't owned sports wheels before, and so it hadn't really occurred to me to even look for such a thing at all. So anyhow, so that was another issue. I brought that to the dealership's attention, and they did give me a discount on another rim, but it was not cheap. I think their regular price was like something like $950, and they got it to me for like $900. It was ridiculous. But I mean, yes, things can happen. Is there a slight possibility that while I was driving there was a pothole or something that scraped it? Perhaps. But you'd think if it were to chew up the wheel that much, I would have known that something like that happened. And by the way, those were all-season tires, and I think they were the 20-inch ones. They weren't even the super low-profile 22-inch ones that had come out on Dodge vehicles like right after that time. So they weren't like summer tires. So they weren't like the super, super thin sporty ones. They were just kind of a medium sporty one. So it wasn't like they were right down on the road. So I would think it would have taken a significant rub or impact to do something like that. So I was pretty sure it was the dealer, somebody with the dealer or a test drive or something. Also, later on, I looked under the front fascia, under the nose of the vehicle, and I could see scrape marks there. And I know that I had been careful about going over like steep driveways and those sorts of things. So, to my knowledge, I hadn't even gone over any steep areas like that. And if I even went over any kind of a speed bump, it would have been extremely slowly, but I'm not sure that I had even gone over a single speed bump by the time I noticed those scrape marks. And I brought it to the dealer's attention, and the salesman actually personally got under there and did some like touch-up paint for me and those sorts of things once I brought it to their attention. But it was, yeah, it was not well taken care of. Whatever and whoever did things with that vehicle, it's hard to say, but it wasn't taken very good care of. I need some water. I've been doing some talking for 20 minutes. Ah, fresh dihydrogen monoxide, H2O. All right. So, next vehicle after the Dodge Charger was, backtrack real quick. Almost forgot. Right before I decided, you know what, I've had enough with this Dodge Charger, I had the Dodge Charger brought in for service, and I don't know if they did not use the proper kind of windshield washer fluid that would have been for winter weather in the Northwest. I don't know. This was in Washington State, by the way. But I brought it to a more local dealer than the one that I had purchased it from. They did the maintenance. Maybe they did everything fine. Maybe it was more me than anybody else. I don't know. But I went to spray the windshield washer fluid in the winter weather. I don't necessarily recommend that, so that is certainly partly my fault, at least partly. But in any case, the tube ruptured because it had iced over, plugged up, whatever, in the cold weather. So the windshield washer tube for the Dodge Charger SRT8 in 2007, it went basically from the reservoir all around under the hood and then over to where it needed to spray out. And the two spray nozzles, I believe those were in front of the windshield wipers on the top of the hood, kind of behind the hood scoop, close to the firewall and the windshield. But in any case, I took it to the local dealer and I had them fix that. When they did that, they routed that hose completely incorrectly, in my opinion, because there were certain clips to hold it in place, and they just left it dangling loose where it could almost get caught in the hood when you went to shut it. And it was just ridiculous. And I didn't fully notice that until I had got it home, and I thought, you know what, it's not worth going back there. I'll just do my best to kind of make it the way I want it to, and eventually I'll trade it in or something. I know that's something petty, but with me, if I keep having negative little things that are annoying happen with a dealer, because I take as much as I can good care of my vehicles within reason. I don't absolutely baby them like crazy, but I do my best to take good care of them and then trade them in for something else within a certain number of years generally. Well, eventually I thought, okay, I'm going to get a different vehicle anyhow. I want something that is more suited to my driving style and easier in traffic and so forth, and especially easier to park. Driving style, the Dodge Charger was pretty cool for that, but it was nice to go to something smaller, and that brings me to the Mitsubishi Lancer Ralliart. It was a 2010, and that experience in a lot of ways was great. The vehicle did have some issues and so forth, but nothing that was extremely horrible for me, but quality wasn't the best. However, the horror story was bringing it to the Mitsubishi dealer where I had purchased it, brought it in for service, and of course the Ralliart is a turbocharged model, and if I recall correctly, I had specifically requested the type of oil that would go with the turbo model. Well, they gave me instead the engine oil that was designed for the CVT non-turbo regular Lancer, not the Ralliart and not the Evo, but instead they gave me the regular oil. And thankfully nothing catastrophic happened. It was cold weather, so it wasn't like it was going to burn up that oil quite as easily if it was hot weather driven hard. But goodness, you'd think that service departments would be more cautious with that, especially if someone is bringing details to their attention. So Also, I found, I think it was that same visit, that they had not secured the air filter when they replaced it, and they left one of the clamps not locked in. And so I kept hearing what sounded like a really cool turbo. It was making a really loud whooshing sound, and I thought, wow, that's kind of cool. It's sort of tuned up, whatever. And it's kind of silly to think that. But in any case, it was just because they hadn't sealed the air cleaner properly. Thankfully, I caught that pretty soon, and I latched the other latch over it. So it wasn't like the air cleaner wasn't on there at all, but instead of the air fully coming through the inlet, it was coming over the filter and through the little gap above the filter, basically around the perimeter of where the housing would close over that filter. So there was filtered air still going into the engine, thankfully, but it wasn't just pulling in the cold air from outside. It was pulling in some of the air from the engine bay, basically, is what was happening. So yeah, that's some of my stories from the Mitsubishi Lancer Ralliart 2010. Okay, next thing was I traded that in for a 2013 Nissan 370Z. And that purchasing experience from the dealer was one of the best purchasing experiences that I have ever had. And they gave me a great deal, and I feel like they went above and beyond to take care of me that way. But when it came to service, well, number one, in Washington State, where I purchased it and where I was living at the time, it was required, and still is to this day as far as I know, to have both a front and rear license plate. And when they installed the front license plate, even though they were kind of telling me, well, you might not want to do that, it might not look as cool, in other words, but I'm like, I don't want to get pulled over just for something silly like that. And so at the Dodge dealer where I got the Dodge Charger, I had been told something similar, but thankfully they took care of me. They got it put on properly and so forth. The Mitsubishi, the person who would have put it on for me wasn't available or something, so I put it on myself. There's so many stories, but anyway. With the going from the Mitsubishi to the Nissan 370Z, when that license plate was put on, I didn't realize this, but when they put the bracket on, it was supposed to stand off a little bit from the front bumper. And the little standoffs, the way that they did it, they actually put it on backwards, like the standoff portion. So it made the license plate like stick way out without the license plate rim, basically, or frame, I mean, around it. And so when the dealership did their car wash thing, the next time the dealership washed it for me, I think it might have been at my next oil change or something, the car wash caught the license plate that was sticking out and bent the license plate. And here I had just recently purchased the vehicle. Thankfully it didn't damage the vehicle, but it's because they put it on backwards. You'd think they would be able to do something simple like that, but in any case, somebody figured it out and they're like, oh, it needs to go this way. It looked so much nicer, so much cleaner once they put it on there the proper way. And I had never put on a bracket and drilled the holes inside of a Nissan 370Z bumper. The one for the Mitsubishi was challenging enough, though it wasn't terrible, but still, when you drill holes in a new vehicle or make screw holes in the bumper of that new vehicle, it's a little bit, I don't know, to me it bugs me a little bit, especially when it's something that is supposed to be pristine. Well, I left that up to the dealer and they didn't do so well at all. Thankfully, that was basically the only real issue that I had with the Nissan service, other than they were often mixing up my name and my brother's name because we both had different Nissans going to that dealership, and so they kept mixing us up and could not seem to get it straight in their computer system. So I guess that was the only other thing. It wasn't terrible. The people there were nice. I still know the name of one of the guys who was there, who was really great to talk to and helped me out a lot, especially once he started to get to know me. But that was the Nissan story. Okay. Eventually, I traded in the Nissan 370Z for by the way, quick side story, after an incident with a deer in the headlight. Yes, I got some deer fluff in the headlight and got some repairs done on the 370Z. And by the way, the repair shop, they did not do well. They didn't get the stickers under the hood properly taken care of. The paint job looked sloppy around the front of the hood with the closure. There wasn't a ton of damage. It mostly got the front bumper area on the driver's side and then the aluminum hood on the 370Z. It was still drivable and so forth. They took care of it there, relatively minor damage, but it was just sloppy work. And they were supposed to be, as far as I could see with research and so forth, a well-known auto body place, and they just did not do a good job. They didn't look like, their work did not look like they really cared. It was like, how can we make this pass so that from 10 feet away it passes, type of thing. But if you look closely, you can see a bunch of stuff has been done if you open the hood. Outside of the vehicle wasn't bad at all, but yeah. Oh, goodness gracious. Okay, so moving forward, I traded in the 370Z Nissan 2013 for a 2016 Subaru, and that was a Subaru Forester. Now, the first part of the horror story, and kind of the main part of it, started where I wanted to purchase a Subaru WRX, and I had one picked out I wanted to order, and I went to my local Subaru dealer, and of course they tried to sell me on one that was very different from the one that I was looking for. Yeah, it was still a Subaru WRX, but it wasn't the color I wanted, didn't have the exhaust that I wanted, and may have been another thing or two. But not only that, but they were going to give me a very low trade-in for the 370Z. Yes, granted, it wasn't perfect with that repair work, but they were giving me an unfair offer and basically wouldn't budge, and tried to practically, I felt like almost like they were trying to trick me into buying the WRX that they had there, when I had clearly said that I didn't want that one. And they're like, okay, well, here, let's get this, and we're going to do this on it and whatever. And no, that's not what I wanted. I get it, sales techniques. That wasn't the worst of it, but the trade-in that was completely unfair, and the fact that they said, well, if we order one, we can't even tell you what your trade-in will be, and so we can just figure, in other words, that we may end up giving you a lot less for your trade-in, and you have to put money down for the order, and if you don't like the deal at that time, you forfeit the money, those sorts of things. They basically made it as if they were pushing me away. So I thought, okay, that's it. I'll go and find another one. So I went to an out-of-town Subaru dealer. They gave me a great trade-in value and gave me a great deal on the Subaru Forester 2.0 XT with essentially the same engine, different top end and so forth, but essentially the same engine as the WRX at the time, and 250 horsepower. It's not tons by today's standards, but this was about 10 years ago, so it was pretty decent. And even today, the Subaru Forester doesn't have that kind of horsepower, 250 horsepower. I don't think you can get that much horsepower in any Forester at this time. But anyway, so got a great deal on my trade-in, a fair deal, even though they knew that it had that incident with the deer and had the repair work done. I was up front with them about that. But they gave me a fantastic deal for my trade-in and a fantastic deal for the 370Z. However, the one weird thing that they did, thankfully I had a zero interest dealer financing thing that had applied to the 370Z, when I traded it in, they would not pay off my loan until the next month rolled around. And I think that was for their bookkeeping purposes. They wanted the books to look better at that Subaru dealership. I'm glad they took care of me with my trade-in and my purchase with good prices on both sides. And I'm glad that I didn't owe any interest on that 370Z payment, so it wasn't like I was owing more because they were waiting forever to pay it off or anything weird like that, of course. But it was just kind of weird how they did that, just saying. But anyhow, it is nice, though, that that Subaru dealership took care of me and got me a fair price. And it wasn't like they were 200 miles away. No, it was probably a 25-minute drive or something in the opposite direction from where that other one was that was maybe 12 or 15 minutes away. So relatively same area, just out of town. So it wasn't like I went to a whole new, humongous, crazy market. Okay. So that's the Subaru story. And then from there, I got I think it was a 2021, time has flown now, so so it's kind of interesting to think about, but I think it was a 2021 Mazda, from what I recall. You can check out my videos. I didn't look back in my records. I could look in my videos and I'd see it right there. But 2021 Mazda 6 turbo, and that was a 2.5 turbo. With that, there weren't any real horror stories per se, other than when I purchased it, the dealer had not evidently finished with the pre-delivery inspection because the tires were still way overinflated for when they're being when the vehicle was shipped over from Japan to the United States, from the manufacturer over to the dealer and so forth. So instead of being at, I don't know, 30 something pounds per square inch, it was like 50 or something like that. So it was handling kind of weird and kind of spinning up the tires when I did the test drive. And so then I checked those out and found that out and shared the feedback with the dealer. So that was really the only, off the top of my head, weird story that I had with the Mazda. Yeah, that was just the one little thing. I will backtrack just briefly back to the Subaru one. And one thing I just remembered is that with the Subaru, same kind of issue I had with the Mitsubishi. When I brought the Subaru into the local dealer for service, it was the same one that was going to give me the very unfair trade-in for the Nissan when I wanted to buy a Subaru. Anyhow, multiple times their computer kept saying that they were putting in the oil for the non-turbo Subaru, but they said, oh no, that's just the computer. We put in the right oil. Look, see, this is the sticker. This is whatever. We put in the right oil. And they did that maybe 4 times. And they said that no matter what, they couldn't change the computer. Maybe twice it showed the right thing, but 4 times or something like that, it showed the wrong oil. The other Subaru dealer where I purchased it from, it didn't have that issue. So watch what your dealers and service places are saying and doing. Make sure you know what your vehicle requires, because if you're not doing your own maintenance, like what I did with my first vehicle, and I've done some little maintenance things myself since then, but if you're not doing your own maintenance, make sure you know what's really happening. Would I still recommend going with a dealer? Yes, for me personally, I would at least. But make sure you stay on top of it and you know about as much as the dealer does if you're having them do it, so that you know what's right and what's wrong with what they perform on your vehicle. Okay, so I was talking about the Mazda, and the Mazda, though, was pretty uneventful as far as the dealer side of things go. I basically was taken care of, great sales experience, one of the best, and can't think of any other major issue off the top of my head for that one. So as far as the dealer was concerned, so I'm thankful for that. All right, and then that brings me to the Ford Maverick. So the purchase experience, though I did have to wait a long time when I special ordered it and so forth, for the 2024 Ford Maverick with the 2-liter turbo. The one bonkers situation that has happened is that the dealer, I won't say which one, but the dealer where I wanted to get the recall taken care of for the backup camera, which by the way has not given me any issues for quite some time. It was freezing about a year ago or so, but I haven't had any real issues with it since then, but that's what the recall is for. Vehicle's working fine otherwise, and the screen has been great for months and months now. But on, I think it was May 12th of 2025, I had ahead of time, a few days or more before that, probably a week before that, I had gone online and reserved my appointment and specifically listed that one of the things I needed done was the recall. I even listed the exact recall number in like the 2 different numbers that are registered for that specific recall, and said that that's one of the main things that I wanted to have done, was that open recall. I also wanted to get my regular maintenance with the oil change and so forth done. I think there was a tire rotation. I was also going to be getting some parts. I knew which parts I wanted to purchase. I had looked them up. I knew the part numbers and all of that. And when I contacted the dealership, they said, well, we can't really do anything about ordering the parts until we see what parts are needed. And so with that, that's not a huge deal, because I get it. They're only going to carry so many and so forth, and they don't want to waste ordering parts that they don't know for sure they need and so forth. But in any case, I bring it in on March 12th. And sure enough, they needed the exact parts that I knew they did. And so they had to order them. So they needed me to come back the next day for those. Not a huge deal. I get it. That's just kind of how they have to do their inventory. And they got the oil change and tire rotation and whatever done. And I check over the vehicle. That's what I always like to do with my vehicles. The vehicle looked, pretty decent. And I look more closely at my paperwork and I think, wait a second, I don't see the recall on here. So I contacted the dealer while I was still nearby, across the street where I had parked to do the look over of the vehicle. And they said, oh, that was on your order? Oh, well, no, I guess that didn't get done. Well, no, we don't have time to do it today. Well, can you come back tomorrow and get it done? And I said, well, yeah, okay, I had specifically mentioned that in my request. It was in my reservation that I did online. I filled it out in detail. Yeah, well, we must have missed it, whatever. Somebody didn't communicate, those sort of things. I get it, we're humans, things happen. Okay, whatever. So I come back the next day, and I had been told the parts may take anywhere from like 1 to 3 days or something like that to come in. But I come back the next day. Turns out the parts had already come in. That's cool. They get the parts put on. They tell me everything's ready to go. I had told them, by the way, that I was there to get that recall taken care of. They say, oh, you know what? We didn't get the recall done. I'm thinking, what? After all that, they still didn't get the recall done? Yeah, it's great they got the parts earlier than they maybe could have. They got it just 1 day versus the 1 to 3 days. They got it like early, that after 1 day. Great. But they did not get the recall done. That's 2 days in a row. I mean, come on. First mistake, granted, it's a mistake. 2 days in a row, that's just uncalled for. So they're like, okay, let me get a technician. I'll have them go out, take care of it. The technician goes out, does some stuff, whatever, for a little bit. Comes back, it's like, okay, good news. Looks like that recall does not need to be done. It looks like it's already updated. It was like a firmware update, whatever. And it can actually do over-the-air updates through Wi-Fi. So it looks like it's actually already taken care of. You're good to go. Recall is good. I'm thinking, okay, thank goodness. But what a mess. 2 days and they didn't do it until I finally brought it to their attention again. And the technician went out and then he talked to me and talked to like the service manager or whatever. And okay. At least it's done, right? Wrong. So I check on my Ford app, and I'm still registered for this open recall. Granted, some things take some time and whatever. Well, eventually, I received notice from that local Ford dealer that, well, you have this open recall, you're going to need to take care of it. And contacted them and said, hey, you know what? I got this recall taken care of. I contacted the same person who was helping to like supervise or manage the service department. I was told in a text message, which I still have, oh yeah, it just can take X number of weeks or whatever, and then it'll be reported to Ford. Well, I started getting multiple notifications, and I'm going to kind of cut to the chase here because this is one of my longest videos. I started getting multiple notifications that the recall needed to be done. I kept saying, hey, you know what? I've been reassured. It's been done. Can you please make sure that Ford knows? I had one person say, oh, you know what? Sorry, we didn't get the word to Ford. I'm going to go ahead and let Ford know. But then I just kept getting notified by the local dealer, you know what? This hasn't been done. This hasn't been done. Finally, I talked to somebody who talked to somebody, and that somebody ended up being a service manager who said, you know what? In other words, you were misinformed. This was never done. And here we are, all these months later, and it was never done, and it should have been done on May 12th. Certainly should have been done on May 13th when the technician himself told me that it was done. And then I started getting all these notifications all the way up until January, so last month. And then once I talked to the service manager and he said, okay, when you come in, we have all these options. We can come out to you, you can come in, whatever. I'm just going to have it done with my next oil change. But that's the plan anyway. But when you come in, we'll get it done, etc. Well, then one of the people who had been calling me called again, like twice, trying to tell me, you know, this recall needs to be done. And I said, well, I talked to the service manager there at that particular dealership, and he's like, well, I work at that dealership. I'm thinking, oh, if only they would have communicated. Now I'm getting these calls that feel like they're annoying, and this should never have been happening. It should have been done the first day. I shouldn't have been getting all those calls and text messages, and it shouldn't have gone on all this time. So that is the horror story, if you want to call it that, with the Ford Maverick. The good news is the Maverick itself is fantastic. It's one of my favorite vehicles that I've ever owned. I would highly recommend it to anybody else who wants to get a Maverick, but just make sure wherever you go, whatever you do with service and maintenance, and for that matter, purchasing vehicles, that you know what's really going on, and you read and reread any kind of purchase contract, service order, anything like that. While you're there, look things over, give them another look over, maybe a third look over, and then make sure that you're comfortable with everything before you go on and assume that things are taken care of the way that you would think they should be, right? All right, everyone. Thank you so much for viewing. If any of you watched this whole video, you get a double thumbs up and a big kudos. Thank you, thank you, thank you. But for those who just watched a portion or two, maybe especially this Maverick portion, thank you also. You rock. All right, this is C.A.R.S signing off.